So today is November 2, 2016, and it's the new moon of the 8th scriptural month. Let's start with asking our Heavenly Family to guide us in this meeting. Eloheinu, Todah Lakal. Heavenly Family, thank you for everything. Please guide us in this meeting. Help our minds to focus on the topic at hand and to understand its import. Achoti Hakrena Lapani. My sister, give guidance to me. Help me to convey the various aspects of this subject in its full breadth, or at least in however it needs to be explained. Let nothing that should be said be left unsaid, and help me to communicate things in the best way possible. Todah, thank you. Please guide us all, help us to see it, to understand the truth, and to conform our lives to it. Thank you so very much. We ask this, B'Shem Samach, in the name of Branch. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so the topic for this new moon may be considered very, very new, and it may be considered very, very old, but the way that it's coming to us, we can correctly say that it's a very old light, or a very old truth in a new light. Perhaps that's the best way to explain it. And for some of you, some of this is going to sound more familiar than for others, because we've talked about the general topic in the past, though we have not talked about the scriptures which relate to this topic, and kind of some of the things that these scriptures have to say concerning it. So the topic is not one that's just a particular passage. In fact, it's not a particular passage, and it's not necessarily a particular series of passages either, even though that is what we are going to be going through. But it is a topic on its own that's very broad, and that is important to understand for much of what we must do in regard to various things. And I know I'm speaking vaguely at first, but it's going to become a lot more specific. One of the things we talked about on a recent call is, or I'll say I mentioned on a recent call, the idea that there are certain things that we can do in order to extend the reach of the branch message. What we're going to talk about today is not one of the things that I had in mind, but it is something that fits into that category, even though it's quite different from the things that I had in mind when I made that comment. The reason why I mention this is to say that the sorts of things that we will talk about at some point as to how to extend our reach and so on, they are very, very different from this. And this, what we're going to talk about today, will really not give you any indicator as to what the other things are. But I think it's important also to realize that what we are going to be talking about today does accomplish that purpose, or at least it can if we make use of it. So in other words, it can accomplish the purpose of extending the reach of the branch message and causing things to move forward more quickly. So the topic has to do with music. And of course, we've talked about this. Some of you are aware of the fact that some of the things that I have to say about music are unconventional. But there's more to it than that. And the way that this ended up, or the way that I learned that this is the new moon topic, I'll start with explaining that. So as each new moon comes up, I'm asking our Heavenly Family more and more, okay, well, what is it? What is the truth which we ought to learn this new moon? What is the subject? And often they do not show much ahead of time, maybe a day, maybe 2 days, maybe an hour, maybe half an hour, and sometimes longer than that. This time I think it was just a day and a half, something like that, which was good because it gave me the time to gather some statements in relation to this. But I think what it was yesterday for one of the dailies, I looked for a daily statement to send out and came across something very interesting from Ellen White. And there's a text in the Dead Sea Scrolls that relates to this topic of music that I had been contemplating. And it's from a composition in the Dead Sea Scrolls known as Songs of the Sage. And, it has certain important things to say about music and vocalizing the truth and different things like that. And so I was wondering if that would be the new moon topic. And then I read this statement from Ellen White, and I'll read it, and you'll see how it brought to light certain aspects that relate to this overall topic of music, and as we will see, to the Songs of the Sage, although, to be clear, the Songs of the Sage is not the topic for the new moon. The new moon topic is much broader. You could say it's sacred song. So I'll start with reading the statement, and we'll go from there to other aspects. So again, bless us, Heavenly Family, as we read this. This is from the book Education, page 167, paragraph 3 to 168, paragraph 4. And it's a little section here called The Power of Song. And I believe that where I originally found this when I sent out the daily text was in My Life Today, which is a devotional. So if you guys are looking back in your texts trying to find this, it should be ML something. And I don't think we ended up, I think we just ended up sending a couple sentences of this. Anyway, this is what it says. The power of song. The history of the songs of the Bible is full of suggestion as to the uses and benefits of music and song. Music is often perverted to serve purposes of evil, and it thus becomes one of the most alluring agencies of temptation. But, rightly employed, it is a precious gift of God, designed to uplift the thoughts to high and noble themes, to inspire and elevate the soul. As the children of Israel, journeying through the wilderness, cheered their way by the music of sacred song, so God bids his children today gladden their pilgrim life. There are few means more effective for fixing his words in the memory than repeating them in song. And such song has wonderful power. It has power to subdue rude, uncultivated natures, power to quicken thought, and to awaken sympathy, to promote harmony of action, and to banish the gloom and foreboding that destroy courage and weaken effort. It is one of the most effective means of impressing the heart with spiritual truth. How often, to the soul hard-pressed and ready to despair, memory recalls some word of God's, the long-forgotten burden of a childhood song, and temptations lose their power. Life takes on new meaning and a new purpose, and courage and gladness are imparted to other souls. The value of song as a means of education should never be lost sight of. Let there be singing in the home of songs that are sweet and pure, and there will be fewer words of censure and more cheerfulness and hope and joy. Let there be singing in the school, and the pupils will be drawn closer to God, to their teachers, and to one another. As a part of religious service, singing is as much an act of worship as is prayer. Indeed, many a song is prayer. If the child is taught to realize this, he will think more of the meaning of the words he sings, and will be more susceptible to their power. As our Redeemer leads us to the threshold of the infinite, flushed with the glory of God, we may catch the themes of praise and thanksgiving from the heavenly choir round about the throne. And as the echo of the angel's song is awakened in our earthly homes, hearts will be drawn closer to the heavenly singers. Heaven's communion begins on earth. We learn here the keynote of its praise.
Amen.
Yes, amen. This section is actually absolutely full of meaning. In fact, we could spend this whole meeting just going through this one statement. We're not going to do that, but we may come back to it. I will briefly mention, though, some of the main points that this statement brings out in order to recap it, keep it fresh in our minds, and to make sure we don't miss it. So the statement points out that the history of the songs of the Bible is full of suggestion as to the uses and benefits of music and song. Okay, so one of the things that we will do is to go through references to music in the Bible and see, well, what does it suggest? Because she says it's full of suggestion as to the uses and benefits of music and song. So that's one aspect. She talks about how music is often perverted, but it can be a huge blessing if rightly employed. She talks about how music is good for memorization. She says that, and of course this is something I think we can all realize, how we can remember tunes very easily. We can remember lyrics. We can remember words a lot better when they are put to music than just on their own. Also, she says that music has the power to subdue rude and uncultivated natures. That is certainly the case, and that can be seen with school children. In fact, experiments have been done to see the behavior of school children who receive musical training versus those who do not. And children who do receive musical training have a better ability to focus, especially if they're learning an instrument. They have the ability to focus, to be calm, to deal with emotional stress and all of these things. It basically helps them to mature. So that's another aspect that Ellen White points out. It has the power to quicken thought, to awaken sympathy, to promote harmony of action, to banish gloom. These are some very broad things that it does. Quickening thought. Today, there's a lot of study that has been done on the effect of music upon the brain, and it is a unique activity. And I'll probably be able to send you guys a link to a short video that summarizes some of what research has found on the topic. But it is a unique activity. Listening to music is one thing, and in the video that I'll send you guys, the way that it describes it is that to listen to music is just like fireworks going off in the brain. So many different parts of our brain are being activated when listening to music. To play an instrument is way beyond that. It can be described rightly as a full brain workout. And literally it increases the volume of our physical brain to play an instrument. It improves memory, both in creating memories, in storing and filing memories, in memory recall, in all of these different aspects. And it also improves the connection between the two hemispheres of the brain, and basically causes us to be better problem solvers, overall thinkers. There's a whole lot that it does. So when Ellen White says that it quickens thought, that is certainly the case. It awakens sympathy. I think we all know what that is like. A song can pull on the strings of the heart more so than many, many things can. Promotes harmony of action. That's an aspect that perhaps we won't get into as much right now, but music is one of the things that unites people. When people have an anthem to sing together, it brings together unity. Banishing gloom, I think we can all attest to that as well. If there's some gloomy feeling that is coming over us, and someone plays a song, or we start singing a song, a joyful song, it banishes the gloom like that, And then she goes on and she talks about how it's one of the most effective means of impressing the heart with spiritual truth. Now, I think that needs to stand out to us. Our whole mission is about the truth. And we need it impressed upon our own hearts, and we need to learn to impress on the hearts of others. And here we're told that music is one of the most effective means of impressing the heart with spiritual truth. That's extremely important. And then she says that temptations lose their power.
Amen.
Now, this is hugely important. So music can cause temptations to lose their power. We had a conversation recently on the calls, and also here at the Living Branch Center, we had a conversation about this, about the importance of using our voices, speaking out loud to defeat temptations. And we talked about the importance of speaking out loud in order to create memories, and how, when we tell stories or when we have an experience, let's say we go on a trip somewhere, then we come back and now we're starting to tell people about our trip. Well, after a few times of telling it, we are creating our memory, and we're forgetting all the other things that we're not telling. And our memory is being formed by the words that we use, by our own telling of the events through which we have gone. So if music is a better way to remember things, then we can see how it would be a very good way of defeating temptation, because we can remember the truth, and the truth is what defeats the temptation. And then when the temptation comes, we can sing and we can play music in order to defeat the temptation, just like we spoke about speaking to defeat the temptation. But music has something more than just speaking, because in addition just to the words, it also captures the atmosphere of the words, or music creates the atmosphere. In fact, there's another statement where Ellen White says that, I think she says, music is the atmosphere of heaven. So in music impresses the meaning, well, I'll say music rightly used impresses the meaning of the words so much more and more powerfully than can be done by just speaking the words on their own. Music is an extremely powerful thing, and we don't really realize its true import. So if temptations can lose their power by using music rightly, then surely it becomes very important. And then the next thing she says after that, she says, life takes on new meaning and new purpose. That is incredible. Think, this isn't some small thing. Look how she's describing music. She's describing music as something powerful enough that when it is used rightly, life takes on new meaning and new purpose. I mean, that's absolutely huge. For life to take on new meaning and new purpose, that must be some profound event. And the fact is, music is a profound event, and it's wonderful because it's a profound event that can take place every day. So there's a lot to this, but again, if you want your life to take on new meaning and new purpose, use music rightly, and we'll talk about what that entails. And then she speaks of song as a means of education. And she says that the value of song as a means of education should never be lost sight of. She talks about bringing it into the home, bringing it into the school, and how it's used to bind people together. And it's a useful means of education. You know, a few years ago, I was starting to learn some Hebrew, and hey, in order to learn the Hebrew alphabet, I learned a song. I mean, it would have been a lot harder to learn it without the song, and that's why in practically every language, children are taught their alphabets with music. It's just a wonderful means of learning. And again, there's much more to it than that. Then she talks about how it's a part of worship. It is an act of worship as much as prayer. Indeed, many a song is prayer. And she said that children should be taught this, and if they're taught to realize it, they will think more of the meaning of the words. This is a huge problem today, where people sing but don't think of the meaning of the words. And there's a reason why that is. There's a history as to how that came to be, and we'll be talking about that a bit. And then, of course, she ends with talking about the heavenly singers. And I love how she talks about drawing near and hearing the heavenly choir and finally joining with them in heaven. But she says, the last sentence here is, we learn here the keynote of its praise. In fact, I'll read the sentence before that as well. Heaven's communion begins on earth. We learn here the keynote of its praise. Okay, so if the heavenly kingdom is full of music, and if the kingdom of heaven is to be established on earth in these last days prior to the second coming of Christ, then we must learn that keynote. And that's the sort of thing that this meeting is really all about. Now, I'll read a couple other things from Ellen White, and then we'll expand from there to other things. Also from the book Education, on page 161, we are told, the melody of praise is the atmosphere of heaven. And when heaven comes in touch with earth, there is music and song, thanksgiving, and the voice of melody. Isaiah 51:3. Okay, so obviously music is important. If it's the atmosphere of heaven, that's quite important. Another statement that emphasizes the importance of music is to be found on page 166 of the same book, Education. This is what it says. With a song, Jesus in his earthly life met temptation. Often when sharp, stinging words were spoken, often when the atmosphere about him was heavy with gloom, with dissatisfaction, distrust, or oppressive fear, was heard his song of faith and holy cheer. So here, evidently, Jesus used music as a means of gaining victory over temptation. And if he used it, then we by all means ought to as well. There's another statement from Ellen White in Manuscript 5, 1874. Music is of heavenly origin. There is great power in music. It was music from the angelic throng that thrilled the hearts of the shepherds on Bethlehem's plains and swept round the world. It is in music that our praises rise to him who is the embodiment of purity and harmony. It is with music and songs of victory that the redeemed shall finally enter upon the immortal reward. There is something peculiarly sacred in the human voice. Its harmony and its subdued and heaven-inspired pathos exceeds every musical instrument. Vocal music is one of God's gifts to men, an instrument that cannot be surpassed or equaled when God's love abounds in the soul. Singing with the spirit and the understanding also is a great addition to devotional services in the house of God. How this gift has been debased. When sanctified and refined, it would accomplish great good in breaking down the barriers of prejudice and hard-hearted unbelief, and would be the means of converting souls. It is not enough to understand the rudiments of singing, but with the understanding, with the knowledge, must be such a connection with heaven that angels can sing through us. Okay. So, there's a lot to this, evidently. Music is of heavenly origin. And notice from this statement, one of the things that I want you guys to remember from this is that vocal music is something here which is emphasized. And Ellen White, if you read all of her statements, she speaks about instruments, and she talks about how God instructed his ancient people to use instruments, and how it's certainly a good thing. She talks about instruments in heaven and so on. But the voice is supposed to be the point of focus above the musical instruments. The voice is an instrument in a sense, but it's one that will not be surpassed by other instruments. And it makes sense when we understand how the voice has the ability to convey such specific meaning. We can portray conceptualizations of the truth that cannot be portrayed with mere instrumental music. She also elsewhere speaks about practicing instrumental music, as a positive thing, but it's the real benefit of music and the full glory that it can bring about can only be found when vocalization is present. There's a lot more Ellen White has to say about this. And maybe I will still read some more of her statements before we go on to other things.
Trent, would you mind telling that reference again, please? Thank you.
Sure. It is Manuscript 5, 1874. And unfortunately, I do not have the paragraphs for this because the Ellen White CD-ROM that contains the letters and manuscripts does not give the paragraphs. The version online at egwritings.org does show the paragraphs, but the one that you can download for your computer does not, and that's what I have and was doing my searching with here. So, but it shouldn't be hard to find, especially if you look up the phrase, music is of heavenly origin. And here's another statement. It's from Manuscript 134, 1899. All the pathway of Israel was cheered by the promises of God. These promises and commandments were to be set to music, and as they traveled through the wilderness, they were to educate their children to sing them, lest they should lose them out of their lives. It was their life to obey the law of God. Disobedience would bring the displeasure of God. So notice, this was a very important thing, that they were to educate their children to sing the promises and commandments of God. Okay, here's another statement of Ellen White in regard to music, and this is quite interesting because it describes heavenly instruments. This is Manuscript 134, 1901. I have seen that confusion is displeasing to the Lord, and that there should be order in playing and also in singing. I saw that all should sing with the spirit and with the understanding also. God is not pleased with jargon and a discord. Right is always more pleasing to him than wrong, And the nearer the people of God can approach to correct, harmonious singing, the more is he glorified, the church benefited, and unbelievers favorably affected. I have been shown the order, the perfect order of heaven, and have been enraptured as I listened to the perfect music there. After coming out of vision, the singing here has sounded very harsh and discordant. I have seen companies of angels who stood in a hollow square, every one having a harp of gold. At the end of the harp was an instrument to turn, to set the harp or change the tunes. Their fingers did not sweep over the strings carelessly, but they touched different strings to produce different sounds. There is one angel who always leads, who first touches the harp and strikes the note. Then all join in the rich, perfect music of heaven. It cannot be described. It is melody, heavenly, divine, while from every countenance beams the image of Jesus, shining with glory unspeakable. So that's quite the statement where she describes these instruments of the angels. She talks about them as harps, but on the ends they have something to turn that changes the tunes. Perhaps somewhat similar to a guitar, how on the end, of course, you can turn the knobs and come to different pitches for the strings. I'm not saying that they were guitars, but just to give someone an idea, perhaps it's something very different. I know that today there's technology where you can have something on the end of a guitar and you just push a button and it changes all the tunings of all the strings if you want to switch to a different tuning, and it automatically turns them for you and all of that. So, who knows exactly what it was, but evidently there was a variety of music enough that there's a need for a change in the tuning of the harps. And it's interesting how she describes it as being something which she cannot describe, something which is so different and wonderful, and in comparison, the music of this world sounded to her harsh and discordant. Here's another statement. This is from the book Christian Education, page 62. Music forms a part of God's worship in the courts above, and we should endeavor in our songs of praise to approach as nearly as possible to the harmony of the heavenly choirs. The proper training of the voice is an important feature in education and should not be neglected. Singing as part of religious service is as much an act of worship as is prayer. The heart must feel the spirit of the song to give it right expression. So here again, we're told that there's this music in heaven, and we ought to imitate the music of heaven as nearly as possible. Some other statements. Education, page 39. The commandments as given from Sinai, with promises of God's favor and records of his wonderful works for their deliverance, were by divine direction expressed in song and were chanted to the sound of instrumental music, the people keeping step as their voices united in praise. So again, we have the messages of inspiration, the various things which heaven has revealed to us, being put to song. And it's interesting how she says that they were chanted to the sound of instrumental music. Chanting in music is something which is far less common today, at least in the Western world. But it was part of the practice of ancient Israel, where it was not always just singing as we typically think of singing, but it was chanting. And there's more to this, and we'll get to that. Another statement, Education, page 307. There will be music there in heaven, and song, such music and song as, save in the visions of God, no mortal ear has heard or mind conceived. Okay, so here she's talking about music that, other than those who have seen it in the visions of God, no mortal ear has heard it or mind conceived it. You know, as we read some of these statements, and Ellen White is talking about the wonderful nature of heavenly music, I'm sure at least some will have the imagination of, oh, you know, that typical angel choir sort of sound that you hear in movies, or you imagine a large church choir, or, you know, a boys' choir, or something along those lines, you know, cathedral-type singing. That's, you know, what comes to mind most often when people hear about this wonderful heavenly music. But if that was the case, Ellen White would not here be saying that no mortal ear has heard music like this or mind conceived it, save in the visions of God. And she wouldn't be saying that it's so different. She would be saying, oh, it's just like the cathedral music, just better, or, you know, or something like that. No, this is something different. So we have to get rid of the stereotype out of our minds. The music of heaven is not like the music that one hears in cathedrals. It's not like the church choir and so on and so forth. It's something very, very different. Here's another statement. This is from Testimonies 6, page 62. In our camp meeting services, there should be singing and instrumental music. Musical instruments were used in religious services in ancient times. The worshipers praise God upon the harp and cymbal, and music should have its place in our services. It will add to the interest. And every day a praise meeting should be held, a simple service of thanksgiving to God. There would be much more power in our camp meetings if we had a true sense of the goodness, mercy, and long-suffering of God, and if more praise flowed forth from our lips to the honor and glory of His name. We need to cultivate more fervor of soul. The Lord says, whoso offereth praise glorifieth me. Psalm 50, verse 23. So here you have the idea that musical instruments were used, that we are to use them in our services, and every day they should be used. And you have various instruments, harps, cymbals, which of course cymbal is a percussion instrument. I know that some people don't like percussion, but it was certainly part of the music of ancient Israel. And it's certainly part of the heavenly music as well. Another interesting statement from the Testimonies. Testimonies 9, page 143. When human beings sing with the spirit and the understanding, heavenly musicians take up the strains and join in the song of thanksgiving. Now that statement is touching on something else, another aspect which we need to discuss. So just keep this in mind, that Ellen White here is saying that when we sing with the spirit and the understanding, heavenly musicians take up the strain and join in the song of thanksgiving. So that's, I don't know if any of you guys have seen videos on the internet where you have people in different parts of the world collaborating and playing music together at such a great distance. Well, that's the sort of thing that Ellen White is describing here. So we can actually have our songs played in heaven while we are playing them on earth if we sing them with the spirit and the understanding. Again, the spirit is the will, and the understanding is the awareness of how the various aspects of knowledge, in this case knowledge pertaining to the song, how those various aspects relate to each other. We understand the meaning of the song, and we choose to align ourselves with it. That's what it is to sing with the spirit and with the understanding. And when we do so, heavenly musicians join us. And so we'll see how this relates to a broader picture. Another statement. Testimonies 9, page 144. In the meetings held, let a number be chosen to take part in the song service, and let the singing be accompanied with musical instruments skillfully handled. We are not to oppose the use of instrumental music in our work. This part of the service is to be carefully conducted, for it is the praise of God in song. The singing is not always to be done by a few. As often as possible, let the entire congregation join. So there are a number of elements here. First, of course, it's emphasizing the importance of music again, and it's saying that we are to have musical instruments skillfully handled. Often, people do not, kind of the whole Puritan spirit wasn't too in favor of music being played in church. And often people have vestiges of that thinking where they conclude that if any music is to be played, it is to be of the most minimalistic sort. It is to be not overly creative, not overly skilled, very, very simple, very, very low level of complexity, and, just kind of leave it at that. Well, here's the thing. If we're supposed to play music skillfully, that implies that the type of music being played is one that requires a certain amount of skill. So it may be something, and I'll state it more definitively, it is to be something more than just simply the most basic music. Now, the basic music has its place too. It's not to diminish simplicity in music, because simplicity is a wonderful thing, but often people just keep with that simplicity and allow no creativity, and that is a sad thing, and much is lost as a result. And then also, of course, the statement emphasizes the importance of everyone joining in with the singing. And perhaps we'll talk about that aspect a little bit more when we talk about the history of music. Another statement, this is an interesting one. It's from Review and Herald, August 27, 1903, paragraphs 18 and 19. And I'm not going to read it for sake of time. We're not going to be able to read every statement here. I'll recap what it means. I'll tell you guys the reference again so you can look it up. It's Review and Herald, August 27, 1903, paragraphs 18 and 19. In this statement, Ellen White talks about having students learning music in schools. And she talks about how it's a wonderful thing. She's glad that a musical element has been brought into this certain school. And she says that every school is to have singing as part of its instruction. And she talks about how the students are to go about witnessing. They are to be evangelists, going around to different places and, entering homes and saying, would you be pleased to have us sing? We would be glad to hold a song service with you. And she talks about how it'll open up doors to do that, to go around and just asking people, hey, would you like to sing for you? And then as the songs are being sung, they can witness through the music, and it'll give them opportunities to speak on different points as well. And there are other statements where Ellen White talks about how it's a wonderful thing to have musical instruments and so on. I'm kind of skimming through some things because I know we don't have time to read every statement here. In Review and Herald, November 9, 1905, paragraph 8, Ellen White talks about the sacred choir of the priests, and she says that the melody of their voices was accompanied by all kinds of musical instruments. And that, of course, is the record that we have in these various scriptures, that they used all kinds of instruments. And, in the past and even today, there are certain instruments that people look down upon. Right now, it's drums. Many people don't like drums and don't like electric guitars. And so those instruments are viewed by many as instruments of evil, when in fact they're not. Of course, there was no electric guitar or even a guitar in ancient Israel, but the lyre was quite similar to a guitar, and they did have drums in ancient Israel. And so, that wasn't really an issue. And even the loudest and most harsh-sounding percussion instrument really is the cymbal. And so it's kind of interesting how that's something that people are less likely to have a problem with than, as compared to other drums. But all of it is part of the all kinds of instruments that Ellen White is here referring to. There's no instrument which in and of itself is a bad thing. And maybe I'll just read one more statement here. This is from Signs of the Times, June 8, 1888, paragraph 8. And this is Ellen White referring to David. The light of day, gilding forest and mountain, meadow and stream, carried the mind up to behold the deity, the Father of lights, the author of every good and perfect gift. What an enlargement of mind such contemplations brought to the simple shepherd. He was daily coming into a more intimate communion with God. His mind was constantly penetrating into new depths for fresh themes to inspire his song and to wake the music of his harp. He poured out the rich melody of his voice upon the air, and it echoed from the hills as if responsive to the rejoicing of the angels' songs in heaven. So here we have the experience of David, where his musical experience was by no means a static one. It's full of penetrating into new depths, receiving fresh themes to inspire his songs and to wake the music of his harp. And of course you have the idea of a joining of his music with the music of the angels in heaven. So, this is all showing us that there is something very important about music. That's the end of the statements here from Ellen White. But there's much more throughout Scripture on this topic of music. Deuteronomy 31, verses 19 to 22. I won't read it, but it instructs Moses to write down a song and to teach it to the Israelites. And it's the song that's contained in Deuteronomy 32, known as the Song of Moses. So they were told to learn this song, and it was for the purpose of them remembering the covenant and remembering the goodness of God. Okay. Also, I just want to mention there are several places throughout Scripture that just say positive things about music in general. Throughout the Psalms, you have this sort of thing where music is just spoken of highly, and you have musicians speaking of their role in playing music. So Psalm 49, verse 4, I will learn a song that imparts wisdom. I will then sing my insightful song to the accompaniment of a harp. Psalm 57, verses 7 and 8. I am determined, O God, I am determined. I will sing and praise you. Awake, my soul, awake, O stringed instrument and harp. I will wake up at dawn. Psalm 71, verse 22 and 23. I will express my thanks to you with a stringed instrument, praising your faithfulness, O my God. I will sing praises to you accompanied by a harp, O Holy One of Israel. My lips will shout for joy. Yes, I will sing your praises. I will praise you when you rescue me. Psalm 92, verses 1 to 3. It is fitting to thank the Lord and to sing praises to your name, O Sovereign One. It is fitting to proclaim your loyal love in the morning and your faithfulness during the night to the accompaniment of a 10-stringed instrument and a lyre, to the accompaniment of the meditative tone of the harp. Psalm 108, verses 1 and 2. I am determined, O God, I will sing and praise you with my whole heart. Awake, O stringed instrument and harp, I will wake up at dawn. That's very similar to Psalm 57, verses 7 and 8. Psalm 144, verse 9. O God, I will sing a new song to you, accompanied by a 10-stringed instrument. I will sing praises to you. Okay, so a new song, not just the same old songs over and over. I know that some people really, really like their hymns and don't want to sing anything else. I do like hymns, some hymns I should say. I don't like all hymns, but there are many hymns that I really do like. It's not my natural mode of expression, but I do really like some of these hymns a lot. But here there's supposed to be a new song, and as we've spoken of in the past, every new movement has had new music that goes along with it. or at least most of them have. Perhaps the branch movement hasn't had as much music as there should be. And even the Davidian movement, most music is just rehashing some old Adventist songs. But the early Advent movement had new songs. You know, the Adventist pioneers were musicians, and they wrote songs, many of which aren't sung anymore in Adventist churches, but the new songs are there nonetheless. The Nazarene movement, of course, they had new songs, as shown by the Odes of Solomon. Those are songs of the Nazarene movement. And, you know, going back through the prophets and to the time of David and before, there's new music being written all through that time. And David here instructs people to sing a new song, and he says that he will sing a new song. And he talks about a 10-stringed instrument. Of course, we've read a couple verses that refer to a 10-stringed instrument here. And in past studies, we had a study at one point on the new song. And we talked about the 10-stringed instrument in terms of its symbolic representation as representing the 10 messages of Revelation 14. But today we're going to end up talking about it a little bit more in terms of what it tells us about actual music. So here are some other statements. Isaiah 26:1. At that time, this song will be sung in the land of Judah. And then it quotes a song. And this is rejoicing in the kingdom, and it's rejoicing with song. Isaiah 51, verse 3. Certainly the Lord will console Zion. He will console all her ruins. He will make her wilderness like Eden, her desert like the garden of the Lord. Happiness and joy will be restored to her, thanksgiving and the sound of music. So these are generally all positive statements about music, and of course they have more specific things to teach us, but the point for now is they generally speak of music as being something important and as being something good. Another passage, and this passage I find to be very meaningful. It's from the community rule. There's a hymn at the end of the community rule, or a song at the end, and this is part of it. This is from 1QS, column 10, lines 8 to 10. All my life the engraved precept shall be on my tongue as the fruit of praise and the portion of my lips. I will sing with knowledge, and all my music shall be for the glory of God. My lyre and my harp shall sound for his holy order, and I will tune the pipe of my lips to his right measure. With the coming of day and night I will enter the covenant of God, and when evening and morning depart, I will recite his decrees. Now that's certainly speaking of music quite positively, and it's attributing much importance to music. And it's interesting how it talks about music here as being an offering, the offering of my lips, it says. I will bless him with the offering of my lips. We'll see more about what this is really referring to, but music is to be an offering to God. And the other interesting thing about this passage is that in the context of describing this musical experience, he says, with the coming of day and night, I will enter the covenant of God, implying that there is a musical aspect to entering into the covenant of God, or at least it can be done by means of music. Okay. There are passages that describe education through music. I'll just read one. One we actually already read, Psalm 49, verse 4. So here's another one. Psalm 78, verses 1 and 2. Pay attention, my people, to my instruction. Listen to the words I speak. I will sing a song that imparts wisdom. I will make insightful observations about the past. Okay, so here's something where it's actually starting by saying, listen, this is instruction. This is a song that imparts wisdom, and it is inviting people to be educated through that song. So this is an example of education through music. And of course we know that the schools of the prophets in ancient Israel had sacred music as part of their education. And so that's quite interesting. There are also passages which show the idea of evangelism through song. Psalm 57, verse 9, I will give you thanks before the nations, O Master. I will sing praises to you before the foreigners. That's very similar, by the way, to Psalm 108, verse 3. Another one, Psalm 96, verses 1 to 3. Sing to the Lord a new song. Sing to the Lord, all the earth. Sing to the Lord. Praise his name. Announce every day how he delivers. Tell the nations about his splendor. Tell all the nations about his amazing deeds. So witnessing to the nations by means of song. Also, we have the idea of inspiration being connected to music. Psalm 49, verses 3 and 4. My mouth will speak wisdom, and the meditation of my heart will be understanding. I will incline my ear to a proverb. I will propound my riddle on a lyre. Again, a lyre is an ancient guitar-like instrument. And here you have speaking wisdom, speaking riddles and proverbs. These are the means of communicating the inspired message, wisdom. Also, Psalm 119, verse 54. Songs were your statutes to me in the house where I live. Okay, here you have your statutes to me, or your instructions to me, your regulations to me. This is someone receiving the revelation of the will of God by means of music. Now, a more direct instance of that is a very interesting thing that happened and it is recorded in 2 Kings chapter 3, verse 15. And Elisha says, but now, bring me a musician. It happened that at the moment the musician played, the hand of Yahweh came upon him. Now, this instance is very interesting because what's happening is that Elisha is supposed to prophesy, and so he says, okay, bring a musician to me, and the musician starts playing, and then the hand of Yahweh comes upon Elisha, and he starts prophesying. It's as if the music somehow invoked the prophecy or brought about the ability for Elisha to prophesy. So this is a very interesting passage and one worth more study. But if it shows anything at all, it's showing an intimate connection between music and inspiration. Also, we have 1 Samuel 10:5. After this, you will come to the Gibeah of God, where there are sentries of the Philistines. Just as you enter the town there, you will meet a procession of prophets coming down from the high place, with harp, tambourine, flute, and a zither before them, and they will be prophesying. So here you have the prophets who will be with musical instruments and prophesying. So there's some sort of connection there, and that sort of connection is made more explicit in 1 Chronicles 25:1. And David and the commanders of the army set apart for the service the sons of Asaph, of Heman, and Jeduthun, who prophesied with stringed instruments, with harps and with cymbals, and their inventory of men of the work, and for their duty was, and then it goes on and gives a list. But here it's very, very explicitly talking about people prophesying with stringed instruments and harps and cymbals and so on. Another passage that connects inspiration to music is Ezekiel 33, verses 32 and 33. Now look, you are to them like a lovely song, beautiful of voice and played well on an instrument, and they hear your words, but they are not doing them. So when it comes, look, it is coming, and then they will know that a prophet was in the midst of them. So you have the prophet here being likened unto a lovely song, etc. And another passage that very specifically likens the experience of music to inspiration is from the Odes of Solomon. It's Ode 6, verses 1 and 2. As the wind moves through the harp and the strings speak, so the Spirit of the Lord speaks through my members, and I speak through his love. This is quite interesting. And, of course, there's a play on words, because as the wind moves through the harp, so the Spirit, it's the same word. It's the same word in Semitic languages. So here you have the wind moving through a harp and causing the strings to vibrate and bring forth sound. And that is likened unto inspiration, the Spirit of the Lord speaking through the members of the odist. So these are all quite interesting things that are showing the importance of music. Also, of course, we know that David and Solomon were musicians. Of Solomon, it is said in 1 Kings 4, verse 32, he composed 3,000 proverbs and 1,005 songs. So that's quite interesting. There's a passage in the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is actually part of one of the Psalm scrolls in the Dead Sea Scrolls. It says, David, son of Jesse, was wise and brilliant like the light of the sun. He was a scribe, intelligent and perfect in all his ways before God and men. Yahweh gave him an intelligent and brilliant spirit, and he wrote 3,600 psalms and 364 songs to sing before the altar for the daily perpetual sacrifice for all the days of the year, and 52 songs for the Sabbath offerings, and 30 songs for the new moons, for the feast days, and for the Day of Atonement. In all, the songs which he uttered were 446, and 4 songs to make music on behalf of those stricken by evil spirits. In all, they were 4,050. All these he uttered through prophecy, which was given him from before the Most High. Okay, so here, we don't know exactly who wrote this, but it's a passage in the Dead Sea Scrolls that's part of a Psalm scroll. It talks about how David wrote all these different songs, and they were written through prophecy, and he wrote them for appointed times. And then it also mentions 4 songs to make on behalf of those stricken by evil spirits. That's kind of interesting. We'll come back to that idea. But this is a passage that says something quite interesting about David. Josephus, in his work Antiquities, Book 7, section or paragraph 305, says this: "And now David, being freed from wars and dangers and enjoying for the future a profound peace, composed songs and hymns to God of several sorts of meter. Some of those which he made were trimeters, and some were pentameters. He also made instruments of music, and taught the Levites to sing hymns to God, both on that called the Sabbath day, and on other festivals." So this is a very interesting statement by Josephus, talking about David in his elderly years, writing many songs and hymns of several sorts of meter. And meter is describing the cadence, or what we might refer to as the beat of the music. And he has trimeters and pentameters. There's different ways to understand exactly what the trimeters and pentameters are referring to, whether it's talking about the amount of beats per measure, in which case you would have something like a 3 over something time signature and a 5 over something time signature, which is a repetition of 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and a repetition of 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or if the meaning of it is not referring to time signatures but to polyrhythms, then it's actually even more complex, where that would mean that you have 3 separate time signatures being played at the same time, rather than just a 3-4 or a 3-8 or a 3 something else. And then you'd have also 5 time signatures at the same time. Like that's the sort of thing that you only find in advanced classical and jazz. But either way, it's describing his music being of various sorts of meters, and being of a more interesting and peculiar type of music than what people today might expect. Not only that, but he's said to have invented his own music. He made instruments, or his own instruments, I mean. He made instruments of music. This is actually confirmed also in Amos, chapter 6, verse 5. It says, "They sing to the tune of stringed instruments. Like David, they invent musical instruments." So you have David. He was one who was an inventor of musical instruments, and he used all sorts of meters and composed many, many songs of several different sorts of meter. And it seems like he was quite the creative music man. And David, of course, he was known in Israel as Israel's beloved singer of songs. You can find that phrase in 2 Samuel 23, verse 1. And then there are several passages throughout Chronicles which describe David instituting a musical system in connection with the temple services. Prior to the time of David, this was not the case. But in the time of David, evidently this was instituted. This is witnessed to by Josephus, by Chronicles, by Nehemiah, and by other passages as well. Also, the wisdom of Ben Sirach. So I'll just read some of the references from Chronicles. First Chronicles chapter 6, verses 31 and 32. "These are the men David put in charge of music in the Lord's sanctuary after the ark was placed there. They performed music before the tabernacle of the meeting tent until Solomon built the Lord's temple in Jerusalem. They carried out their tasks according to regulations." 1 Chronicles 15:16. David told the leaders of the Levites to appoint some of their relatives as musicians. They were to play various instruments, including stringed instruments and cymbals, and to sing loudly and joyfully. 1 Chronicles 16:4. He appointed some of the Levites to serve before the ark of the Lord, to offer prayers, songs of thanks, and hymns to the Lord God of Israel. 2 Chronicles chapter 23, verse 18. Jehoiada then assigned the duties of the Lord's temple to the priests, the Levites, whom David had assigned to the Lord's temple. They were responsible for offering burnt sacrifices to the Lord with joy and music, according to the law of Moses and the edict of David. And I'll also read the one from Sirach. Wisdom of Ben Sirach, chapter 47, verses 8 to 10. Referring to David. In all his works he praised the Holy One Most High with words of glory. With his whole heart he sung songs and loved him that made him. He set singers also before the altar, that by their voices they might make sweet melody and daily sing praises in their songs. He beautified their feasts and set in order the solemn times until the end, that they might praise his holy name, and that the temple might sound from morning. Not morning as in crying, but morning as in the first part of the daylight period. Now, again, prior to the time of David, I mean, if you read the Pentateuch and how the law of Moses describes the priestly services, they are silent. There's no music. There's no speaking. There's only two exceptions that I know of to that. One is on the Day of Atonement, where the high priest is to confess the sins of Israel over the head of the scapegoat. That's speaking. The other one is the ordeal of jealousy found in Numbers 5, where the priest has to say some things to the woman who is suspected of basically cheating on her husband. So that's the issue, where those are the only two examples that I know of, and maybe there are more, but those are the only two that I'm aware of that actually have any sort of sound in the temple services or in the sanctuary service that is kind of deliberate sound, that's non-incidental. I mean, you'll obviously have incidental sounds when slaughtering animals and the crackling of the fire on the altar and different things like that. But other than that, the law of Moses presents the priestly services as being silent, other than those two instances. Our phone is letting us know that we have only a few minutes left, so I'm going to hang up and call back in. There is some more to go through. Are you guys wanting to take a little bit of a break? Like, should we just say 10 minutes and then we'll be back? What do you guys think?
Yes, that's a good idea.
Okay, I think that's excellent. Okay, so it'll be at 35 after the hour in whatever time zone you're in. So at 35 after, we will commence again. All right, so see you guys all very soon.